We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. You are not what you think you are. And the version of yourself you have been defending, protecting, and trying to improve is not the version that matters. What you call your identity is a composite, a collection of patterns assembled in response to pressure, a survival structure built to navigate conditions you did not choose. And while that structure has kept you functional, it is not you. It is what you built to protect what you actually are. And at some point, you have to decide whether you are going to keep fortifying the structure or whether you are going to remember what it was built to protect. The observer illusion. Most people spend their entire lives operating as if they are their thoughts, as if the voice in their head, the one narrating experience, evaluating options, judging outcomes, is the core of who they are. And because that voice is constant, because it never stops, because it has been there for as long as you can remember, it feels like identity. But that voice is not you. It is a function, a cognitive process, a pattern recognition system designed to help you navigate complexity by creating continuity across time. It remembers the past, projects the future, and tries to maintain coherence between the two by constructing a story about who you are and what you are doing. And that story is useful. It helps you function. It gives you a sense of stability. But the story is not reality. It is a model, a simplification, a reduction of what you actually are into something manageable enough to hold in working memory. Think about the last time you tried to explain yourself to someone. What did you say? You probably described your roles, your relationships, your history, your beliefs, and all of that is true. But none of it is you. It is what you do, what you have experienced, what you have decided. But it is not what you are. What you are is the thing doing the experiencing, the awareness inside which all of those roles, relationships, and patterns arise. And that awareness is not constructed. It is not built. It is not the result of your history. It is what has been there the entire time, watching the history unfold. Most people never notice this. They are so identified with the content of their experience that they never recognize the space in which the experience is occurring. They are so focused on the story that they never notice the storyteller. And because they never notice the storyteller, they remain trapped inside the story, believing that the only way to change their life is to change the plot. But the plot is not the problem. The identification with the plot is the problem. You cannot solve that by changing the narrative. You can only solve it by recognizing that you are not the narrative. You are the one aware of the narrative. And that distinction changes everything. You realize that you can observe the voice without obeying it. You can hear the thought without believing it. You can notice the pattern without being controlled by it. That is the beginning of the shift from identification to awareness, from being the story to being the one aware of the story. And that shift, small as it sounds, is the foundation of everything that follows. The participant shift. There is a moment in every developmental trajectory where the illusion of being an observer collapses, where you realize that you are not watching your life unfold from a distance. You are inside it, embedded in it, generating it with every choice you make. This sounds obvious. But most people do not live as if it is true. They live as if life is something happening to them, as if they are passengers in a vehicle they did not design, traveling a route they did not choose, subject to conditions they cannot control. And from that position, the only rational response is to adapt, to manage, to minimize harm and maximize comfort within the constraints. But that framing is incomplete. You are not a passenger. You are a participant. And participation is not the same as control. You do not control the conditions. You do not control the system. You do not control the other participants. But you are not passive. You are active. You are choosing. And your choices are shaping the system in ways you cannot fully predict, but are fully responsible for. This is the shift from observer to participant. And it is terrifying, because as long as you believe you are observing, you can maintain distance. You can critique without implicating yourself. But the moment you recognize that you are participating, that distance collapses. You are no longer outside the problem. You are inside it. And your choices, your actions, your patterns are either contributing to coherence or contributing to chaos. Most people resist this shift because participation requires responsibility, and responsibility feels like a burden. It feels like you are being asked to carry the weight of outcomes you did not cause. But that is not what responsibility is. Responsibility is not blame for the past. Responsibility is agency in the present. It is the recognition that what you do now matters, that your choices have weight, that you are not irrelevant. And here is the paradox. The moment you accept that you are a participant, you stop feeling powerless. Because powerlessness is the emotional state of the observer, the person who believes they cannot affect the outcome. But participants know they can affect the outcome, not by controlling it, but by choosing coherently inside it. You are not powerful because you can make the system do what you want. You are powerful because you can choose how you respond to the system. And that choice, repeated over time, builds structure. It shapes patterns. It influences the conditions for everyone else embedded in the same system. You are not a passive receiver of reality. You are an active generator of it. Your structure is not your identity. Here is where it gets complex. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your roles. You are not your history. But you also are not separate from those things. You are the awareness inside which all of those things arise. And the relationship between the awareness and the structure is what defines your experience of being human. The structure is necessary. You cannot function without it. You need patterns. You need habits. You need strategies for navigating recurring situations. You need a sense of continuity across time. The structure is not the enemy. The structure is the vehicle, but the vehicle is not the driver. And most people forget this. They become so identified with the vehicle that they start to believe the vehicle is all they are. They defend it, they protect it, they try to upgrade it. And all of that is fine, except when it prevents them from recognizing that the vehicle is temporary, that it was built for a specific set of conditions, and that when the conditions change, the vehicle needs to change too. This is why identity crises are so destabilizing, because an identity crisis is not actually a crisis of who you are. It is a crisis of the structure you built to navigate who you thought you were supposed to be. The structure is failing. It is no longer producing coherence, and the part of you that is identified with the structure experiences that failure as existential threat. But you are not losing yourself. You are losing a version of yourself that was never permanent, a construction, a response to conditions that no longer apply. And the awareness inside you is not threatened by the collapse of the structure, it is relieved, because the structure was a constraint. It was limiting your capacity to respond to the present by forcing you to repeat patterns built for the past. When the structure collapses, what remains is the awareness, and the awareness is capable of building a new structure, a more coherent one that is responsive to the actual conditions rather than the conditions you were trained to expect. But you cannot build the new structure while you are still defending the old one. You have to let it collapse. And that requires trust. Trust that what you actually are is not dependent on the structure, the layers of constructed self. The structure you call your identity has layers, and each layer was built in response to different pressures at different stages of your development. Understanding these layers does not dissolve them, but it creates distance, and distance is what allows you to stop defending structures that are no longer serving you. The deepest layer is biological, the nervous system's hardwired responses to threat, reward, connection, and loss. installed before you had language, before you had memory. These are not choices, they are reflexes, and they shape your experience of safety and danger in ways you cannot override through willpower alone. Above that is the relational layer, the attachment patterns formed in early childhood based on whether your needs were consistently met. Were you seen? Were you safe? That data became the template for how you relate to others, how you regulate emotion, how you interpret trust and betrayal. You do not remember forming it. You just live inside it, seeking relationships that confirm the template, avoiding those that challenge it, not realizing you are doing any of this because the pattern feels like reality. Then there is the social layer, the roles you were assigned based on your family, your culture, your circumstances. You were told who you could be. You internalized those rules. You learned to perform the version of yourself that was rewarded and suppress the parts that were punished. And most people spend their entire lives trying to optimize that performance, investing more and more in a role that is not them. And the deeper the investment, the harder it becomes to let go when the conditions change and the role no longer fits. Finally, there is the psychological layer, the story you tell about yourself, the narrative that explains why you are the way you are. This layer is meaning-making, and it is not true. It is an interpretation, one that changes based on what you need it to do. The mind constructs coherence, and coherence matters more to it than accuracy, because a coherent story allows you to function. An accurate but fragmented story leaves you paralyzed. These layers interact, they reinforce each other. The biological triggers the relational shapes the social gets encoded into the psychological, and the psychological feeds back into the biology. All of it is what you think of as your identity, but none of it is permanent, none of it is you. It is what you built to navigate the conditions you were inside, and when the conditions change, the structure fractures. And the awareness inside you, the part that is actually you, is not threatened by the vehicle breaking down. It is capable of building a new one, the function you are designed for. You are not on Earth by accident. You are not here because of random chance. You are here because there is a function you are designed to fulfill. And that function is not about what you do for work. It is not about your achievements or your legacy in the conventional sense. The function you are designed for is developmental. You are here to become something, not to accomplish something, not to acquire something, but to become. To develop capacity, to refine coherence, to build the structure of awareness that allows you to navigate complexity without fragmenting. And the conditions you are inside, the high-pressure environment, the ambiguity, the suffering, the difficulty, all of it is part of the design. It is not punishment. It is not a mistake. It is the exact set of conditions required to produce the development you are here to undergo. Think about what happens to a muscle when it is never challenged. It atrophies. It loses capacity. The same is true for awareness. If you are never required to hold tension, you do not develop the capacity to hold tension. If you are never required to make decisions under ambiguity, you do not develop discernment. If you are never required to absorb consequence, you do not develop integrity. The system you are inside is not trying to make you comfortable. It is trying to make you coherent. And coherence is not built in comfort. It is built in pressure, in the gap between what you are and what you are capable of becoming, in the friction of navigating conditions that require more capacity than you currently have. Every time you face that gap, you have a choice. You can collapse, you can fragment, you can default to old patterns, or you can hold the tension, you can stay present, you can allow the pressure to reorganize you into something more capable. That is the function. Not to succeed, not to win, not to avoid failure, but to remain coherent under conditions designed to reveal incoherence. And the system recognizes when you do this, not with congratulation, not with validation, but with access. Access to higher complexity, access to greater responsibility, access to roles that require the exact capacity you built by refusing to collapse under the pressure you just survived. This is not reward, this is progression, and progression is the function you are here to develop, to become more capable of navigating the system without losing yourself inside it. And the more you develop, the more you contribute to the stability of the whole. Because coherent beings are what hold systems together, and the system needs coherent beings at every scale, in every role, in every condition. The scale you operate at. Here is what most people do not realize. You are not operating at one scale. You are operating at multiple scales simultaneously. At the biological scale, you are temporary, fragile, finite, a body subject to physical laws. At the psychological scale, you are also temporary. The mind you have now is not the mind you had at 5, and it is not the one you will have at 70. At the social scale, your identity is relational, co-constructed through interaction with others, shifting as those relationships shift. But there is another scale, one that most people never consider. At the developmental scale, you are not a body, not a mind, not a role. You are a process, a trajectory, a progression from less coherent to more coherent. And at this scale, you are not temporary, you are continuous. The body dies, the mind reorganizes, the roles change. But the developmental trajectory persists. The capacity you build does not dissolve when the structure that built it collapses. It carries forward. And the awareness that has been developing through all of those bodies, all of those minds, all of those roles, that awareness is what you actually are. Not the current version, not the temporary configuration, but the continuous process of becoming more than you were. And that process does not end. It does not complete. It does not reach a final state. It just continues through conditions you cannot predict, through challenges you are not ready for, through transformations you cannot control. The reason you are here, inside this particular body, this particular mind, this particular set of conditions, is because this is the scale where your development is currently happening. This is the pressure you need. This is the complexity you are ready for. You are not small. You are not insignificant. You are embedded in a developmental system that spans scales you cannot perceive and timelines you cannot measure. And the choices you make here, in this body, in this life, in this moment, are shaping a trajectory that will continue long after this version of you is gone. The recognition moment. There is a moment, usually when the pressure is highest, when something shifts, when you stop trying to figure out who you are and you simply recognize what you have always been. It is not a thought. It is not an insight. It is not a conclusion you arrive at through analysis. It is a recognition, a remembering, a sudden clarity that what you have been searching for has been here the entire time. You are not your thoughts, but you are aware of your thoughts. You are not your emotions, but you are aware of your emotions. You are not your body, but you are aware of your body. You are not your roles, but you are aware of your roles. You are the awareness, and the awareness has never been absent. It has been here, constant, unchanged, watching everything else arise and dissolve. This is not a mystical experience. This is not enlightenment in the spiritual sense. This is structural recognition. The moment you realize that the thing you have been trying to fix, improve, defend, or transform is not the thing that needs attention. The thing that needs attention is the relationship between the awareness and the structure. And that relationship is what determines whether you experience your life as coherent or fragmented. When you are identified with the structure, change feels like threat, because change means losing part of what you think you are. but when you recognize that you are the awareness, when you understand that the structure is temporary and the awareness is continuous, change is no longer a threat. It is a necessity. It is the mechanism through which development happens. And once that shift occurs, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this developing in me?" That is not optimism. That is not positive thinking. That is structural orientation. The recognition that you are not a victim of the system. You are a participant in a developmental process that requires pressure to function. The recognition usually arrives in a gap, in a moment between stimulus and response. You are about to react in the habitual way. The pattern is already activating. And then suddenly there is space. A pause. A beat where you notice that you are about to react but have not yet reacted. And in that space, you see the pattern. You see the structure. You see that you are not the pattern. You are the one aware of the pattern. And that awareness gives you a choice you did not have before. This is how the shift from identification to awareness begins. Not through effort, through recognition, through noticing what has always been true, but that you were too identified with the content to see. The daily practice of inhabiting awareness. Recognizing what you are is one thing, inhabiting it is another, because recognition is a moment. Inhabiting is a practice, a repetition, a choice you make again and again, in small moments, when the pressure is low and the stakes feel irrelevant. Most people wait for the big moments, the crisis, the breakdown, the life-changing event. But you do not have to wait for crisis. You can practice the shift in ordinary moments, in the gap between stimulus and response, in the space where you are about to react but have not yet reacted. Pause. Right now. Notice what you are aware of, not what you are thinking about. What you are aware of, the sensation of your body, the sound in the room, the quality of your breath, the fact that you are hearing these words and something in you is processing them, evaluating them, deciding whether they are true. That something, that processing, that awareness, that is what you are. And it is here, always, not sometimes, not only in special moments, always. You just forget to notice it because you are so focused on the content of awareness that you never pay attention to awareness itself. The practice is simple. Notice, not analyze, not interpret, just notice. Notice that you are aware. Notice that awareness is constant even though the content is changing. Notice that you are not the thought. You are the space in which the thought arises. And the more you practice this, the more you start to inhabit the awareness instead of the structure. You stop defending your identity because you recognize it is not you. You stop trying to control outcomes because you recognize that control is not the goal. You stop resisting change because you recognize that change is how development happens. And you start to experience your life not as a problem to solve, but as a process to participate in. This is not self-control in the forceful sense. This is not willpower. This is recognition. The recognition that you are not the pattern. You are the awareness inside which the pattern arises. And awareness is always free to choose, even when the pattern is strong, even when the conditioning is deep, even when the habit feels inevitable. The awareness is always capable of choosing differently. And the more you practice inhabiting that awareness, the more that capacity becomes your baseline rather than the exception. The responsibility of recognition. Here is what happens when you recognize what you actually are. You lose the ability to blame, not because blame is wrong, but because blame requires you to believe you are a victim. And you cannot be a victim and a participant at the same time. Once you recognize that you are inside, that you are embedded, that your choices matter, blame stops making sense as a permanent position. You are still allowed to name harm. You are still allowed to set boundaries. But you cannot stay in the victim position. because the victim position is the position of the observer. And you are not an observer. You are a participant. And participants do not get to opt out of responsibility just because the conditions are difficult. A person born into a distorted system is not responsible for the distortion, but they are responsible for whether they perpetuate it or disrupt it. Yes, that is a heavier burden for some than for others. Yes, the system is not neutral. It is biased. It is unjust in ways that favor some and disadvantage others. All of that is true, and none of it removes your responsibility for the choices you make now. Because responsibility is not about fairness. Responsibility is about agency. And agency is the only thing that allows you to change your trajectory. The system does not become fair while you wait. The system reflects the choices of the participants. And if you want the system to change, you have to change your participation in it. That means you stop waiting for permission. You stop waiting for conditions to improve. You choose coherence now, in the conditions you are actually in, with the resources you actually have. And here is what recognition does to failure. When you recognize that you are not the structure, failure is no longer a statement about your worth. It is feedback about the structure, information about which patterns are no longer functional. When you fail from the position of the structure, you experience it as shame, as confirmation that you are not enough. And that shame keeps you stuck, prevents you from learning because you are too busy defending yourself from the emotional weight of what happened. But when you fail from the position of awareness, you experience it as data, as signal, as the system showing you where your current capacity ends and where development is required. And instead of collapsing into shame, you absorb the information. You recalibrate. You build the new structure based on what the failure revealed. This is not spiritual detachment. This is structural orientation. The recognition that you are here to develop. That failure is part of development. And that learning only happens when you stop identifying with the structure and start inhabiting the awareness that is capable of rebuilding it without being destroyed by its collapse. The paradox of smallness and significance. You are small, cosmically small. One body among billions. One participant in a system so vast you cannot perceive its edges. At the scale of the universe, your existence is statistically insignificant. And you are also critical, structurally critical, because the system does not function without participants. And every participant, no matter how small, contributes to the coherence or chaos of the whole. Your choices ripple, your patterns propagate. Your coherence or incoherence becomes part of the inherited structure that others have to navigate. You are not powerful in the sense of control. You cannot determine outcomes. But you are powerful in the sense of influence. You can choose coherence when the pressure is pushing you toward fragmentation. You can choose integrity when the system is rewarding deception. You can choose presence when the default is distraction. And those choices shift the baseline. Not dramatically, not immediately, but cumulatively, because the system is made of choices. And every coherent choice you make is a vote for a different kind of system, a different kind of normal, a different set of conditions for the next generation. You are not here to save the world. You are here to stop contributing to its fragmentation. And if enough participants make that same choice, if enough people refuse to perpetuate the dysfunction they inherited, the system stabilizes. Not because anyone forced it to, but because coherence, chosen consistently across enough participants, becomes self-reinforcing. You matter, not because you are special, but because you are embedded. And embedded beings who choose coherently are what hold systems together. Who you actually are. You are awareness, continuous, unchanging, the constant observer inside which everything else arises. You are also structure, temporary, adaptive, the vehicle you built to navigate the conditions you are inside. and you are process, developmental, progressive. The trajectory from less coherent to more coherent that persists across scales you cannot perceive. All three are true, and the relationship between them is what defines your experience of being human. When you identify with the structure, you suffer every time the structure is threatened. When you inhabit the awareness, you recognize that the structure is meant to change. And when you align with the process, you stop resisting the pressure and start using it to develop the capacity you are here to build. You are not small inside this story. You are embedded in a developmental system that spans timelines you cannot measure and scales you cannot perceive. The choices you make here, in this body, in this life, are shaping a trajectory that extends far beyond what you can currently comprehend. And the awareness you are developing, the coherence you are building, the capacity you are refining, all of it carries forward. You are not a passive observer. You are an active participant. And your participation matters, not because it guarantees success, but because it contributes to the coherence of the whole. And coherence, built one choice at a time, is what holds the system together. You are here on purpose. You are here with function. And the sooner you stop defending the version of yourself that was never meant to be permanent, the sooner you can start inhabiting what you actually are. This episode did not come to convince you. It came to place you. If something in you recognized this, not believed it, not agreed with it, but remembered, write "I awaken" in the comments. Not as a signal to others, as a signal to yourself. The hierarchy responds to readiness, and readiness is always internal.